science is exciting. Yeah, it is really, yeah, this would be great if we could actually get paid well. Yeah.
Hi everybody and welcome to Reproducibility, an open science podcast featuring early career researcher. I am Jan, I'm a PhD fellow at ITU of Copenhagen, and today I'm joined by Sophia.
Hello, yes, I'm Sophia. I'm a PhD student at the University of Cambridge, where I'm also right now. And we're also joined today by Katrina and Ilse. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, so I'm Kat Almeida Warren. I am an early career researcher, so a Leverhulme Fellow at the University of Oxford and within the School of Anthropology and Museum Ethnography. I primarily research chimpanzees and their culture using archaeological methods. And today I'm sort of joining the podcast in my capacity as a University College Union temporary representative for the department I work at.
Okay, hi. My name is Ilse. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Oxford as well. My background is in psychology and I study social norms. And I am also part of the University and Colleges Union postgraduate group here at Oxford.
Cool. Thanks so much, you two, for coming on. As you listeners might have already guessed from the introductions, that today we are going to talk about the ongoing strikes/industrial actions happening in the UK at the moment, particularly at the universities. Kat, Ilse, for those not working or living in the UK, could you give us a brief overview what is currently happening, what your dispute is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, we're sort of going through two disputes, and these have been more or less ongoing for some time, but sort of the latest phase of the industrial action and disputes sort of started in November last year. And the two main disputes, the first one relates to pensions. So there was a cut to pensions just after the pandemic. So many people got cuts in 35% of the contributions, which means that, you know, later on in life, when they do retire, they will have significantly less money to rely on post-work. And then the other dispute is sort of a broader action, which is within the UCU we call the four fights. So they're four fights that really are to the heart of the academic system in the UK. One of them is pay raises, and this is connected to the fact that there really hasn't been a pay rise in the last 12 years, or at least one that has matched inflation. And this is something that applies to lots of different unions, and we can go into that a bit further maybe later on in the podcast. And then there's also one of the fights is on working conditions. So a lot of people, a lot of workers within the unions have felt overworked and very stressed out with the workloads that they've been given. So that's one of the main fights, especially for early career researchers who feel like they're obliged to do and work above and beyond what their contracts are telling them to do. And then there are also two other fights. One of them is related to closing the pay gaps between women, men, but also people from ethnic minorities and with disabilities. And that's something that is a huge, huge problem across the UK. And finally, which is a big one, especially for early career researchers, is to end casualized contracts. So these are contracts that are short term. So a lot of early career researchers and even professors or lecturers might be contracted on 1-year contracts, sometimes even less. But the fact is that there's no continuity or sort of job security in that sense. So very often people are faced, 10, 15 years of these very short-term contracts, which over time can be very taxing on your day-to-day life, but also your academic progression. So those are kind of the four fights and the pensions dispute that are ongoing. Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, at the moment you are on a grading boycott?
So back in February, March, and also in December, or is it November? Wait, correct me, was it November or December?
It was November that we started, yeah.
Okay. So back in November and December and February, March, there have been days of strike. So actually, days of not working and pickets. And at the moment, there is a marking and assessment boycott. So we're working, but not marking and assessing.
As someone who never had to go on a strike, who was never called upon by their union. How are you two experiencing this? How is it to, suddenly be on the picket line, suddenly have to take, suddenly have to lay down work? How are you experiencing that?
So yeah, during the strike, I would have taught a few courses, but I didn't, and obviously that sucked. Like, it's not fun, and you feel bad for your students. But it's important to disrupt the system, otherwise the university has no incentive to change. So that was going on. We would stand on picket lines, which sometimes it could be fun. We're singing and chanting and making noise and getting also support from people, like driving by honking. Mm-hmm. But also it's a lot of hours just standing in the cold, which also is not fun. And I don't know, it's also made me more aware, I guess, of how messed up the system is. So on the one hand, it's really nice that you're like forming this community and you're fighting back, and that feels really great. But you're also more and more aware, I guess, of why is nothing changing? We're out here, we're like asking for change and nothing is happening, and that can be really frustrating as well. So that's been my experience so far. And then currently, actually, during the marking assessment boycott, I'm currently not teaching. I'm not marking any assignments, but I have an assignment or like an assessment that is due to be marked. So I guess now I'm on the other side. I'm on the student side at the moment. And yeah, that's also an interesting experience now, like from that side. But I still fully, of course, support the boycott. I think it's a good thing to be doing, and hopefully universities will listen more.
And so aside from the fact, obviously, that you can be on both sides of the strike, are there any other differences for you as a postgraduate worker, as a student worker, to the situation that Kat's in?
So yeah, as a PhD student in the UK, you're not staff. So generally, I cannot strike from my work, the research, etc., because I'm not being paid to do so. But yeah, a lot of PhD students also teach, also to pay for their living costs, and that is a job the university pays you for, and you can strike. So yeah, it's been interesting being a PhD student in the UK and not really being staff, but then occasionally also being staff and fighting for these things. And even though I'm currently not staff, I plan to stay in academia. And of course, these fights are really relevant to me in the upcoming years when I leave my PhD and hopefully enter postdocs and professorships, etc.
Do you think these strikes impact your personal career in the sense of you're not getting work done, you're not working on publications, and academia is fast moving. We are very metrics obsessed to our own demise.
Yeah.
Is this something you think about?
Yeah. I'll jump in here, but yeah, all the time. I mean, it is, it's great to be striking, and it's great to be participating in this, and Ilse covered a lot of the sort of the benefits, but also the challenges of being involved in these disputes. But as a researcher, and I imagine Ilse will feel the same as a PhD student or a PhD researcher, trying to get their work off the ground and sort of meet the deadlines, it is quite disruptive. I mean, I'm at a stage where I just started my new research in November, so it kind of aligned with the strike. So that obviously delayed a lot just with the planning process, making sure that I have all the equipment that I need or applying for the funds that I need to get that equipment. So there were delays on that front. Also delays on just communicating with people and potential collaborations, because it means, you're not really answering emails. You're not, it should cover all of those aspects of work connected to the university. So that was quite hard. And at some points it did feel like, when is this going to end, and when am I going to be able to get back to the things that I'm passionate about and the research that I need to get done to kind of progress in my career. And then the other side has also been delays with publications. So I had 2 publications coming out of my PhD that are on the docket, and they're sort of either submitted or, ready for revisions and things like that. And I had planned to basically have them ready maybe 2 months ago, but because of everything happening, it's reprioritizing, and I've had to prioritize basically my current research, because I have a lot of things happening later on in the year and had to put a pause on the publications themselves at the moment. So I'm only just getting back to that, but means that there's sort of a couple of months delay in the whole planning and scheme of things, which, for early career researchers, it's a lot. And it's really hard to really make those decisions. Is this good for you? Because as an early career researcher as well, if you're striking, it might not seem like you have the same amount of impact as maybe someone who is teaching and has a lot of contact hours with students. So our disruption as researchers or even as PhD students isn't as obvious because the students aren't really affected by it. So it's kind of negotiating that. And there's been a lot of discussions within the union of how we can support each other. So in some cases, some people might feel like they're unable to strike for many different reasons. Sometimes it's personal reasons, and how we can support each other in the best ways we can and really leverage what our connections are with the university to make sure we have the greatest impact possible.
I just want to say, like, another thing we were also doing during the strikes, like, as Kat said, like, it's, if you're not teaching, that it's difficult to like impact the university, because the university needs to somehow feel that pain, right, of us not working. But we have been organizing teach outs, so like also to try to get the students more involved and, explain to them why we're striking and hopefully get them on our side, which has been, I think, quite successful. At least, a couple of students got more and more involved with the strikes, which was really, really great to see as well.
So teach outs is just when you
Sorry, teach out is like, I guess, I guess is when you quote teach in the broadest sense outside of university buildings. So we've had like radical knitting, but so we've had like speeches and rallies and like
radical
I guess
knitting.
Quote unquote, yes, So spending our time like knitting like little hats for preemie babies in the hospital, for instance, or like and then chatting about just forming community, chatting about what else we can do as a union. We've also like created co-working sessions outside of department buildings, so people didn't have to work inside the buildings, but instead like could still get work done together outside. And just also fun, more fun events again to build that community and be visible to students. We had a really lovely like radical love workshop as well, like in front of the Radcan, which is a big building, a big here a big square here in Oxford, where we had a lot of students join, and it's really great to try and show the students that we're striking, and why we're striking.
So the students are kind of the people who are most affected by the strikes, correct?
Well, and the researchers themselves, right? Because I think, right, like as already mentioned, right, like sort of striking that balance between what's going to be effective as a strike action and what is then actually not in your own interest.
I guess when the real workers strike, I guess the people who want to take the train are the most affected, besides the people who are striking. But that's the same in this case.
And like the equivalent would be the students. And I mean, taking a train the last week with Germany also liking to strike a little bit. At the moment, the German train workers, I saw a lot of sentiment among the train users, them not being angry at the train company who fucks over the employees, but at the employees. Did you experience something similar? I mean, Ilse, you already talked about that the students are supportive, at least in part.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of being on the picket line, and that's mostly on the picket line outside our department, there's been a lot of student support. We had a lot of students regularly coming and joining the picket line and
bringing coffee,
participating, bringing coffee and biscuits, and they also organized some of their own teach outs right at the start of the industrial dispute, which is really nice because they sort of created this space to have dialogue about. One of them was about industrial disputes or strikes throughout the world, because a lot of our students come from lots of different backgrounds in different countries. So they sort of share their experience of striking in their own countries, or, relatives or people that they know striking, and that relationship with the government and the institutions that they're striking against. Yes, of course, there are people who are not happy with it, and some of them are students, and I heard on the picket line from other colleagues that sometimes either they don't want to engage with us, and also from the general public as well. I mean, we've had once or twice a few people shouting out of the window of the car, telling us to get back to work or calling us lazy bastards, which is really, it doesn't feel great. But at the same time, overwhelmingly, it's been really supportive. We've had lots of cars honking, also people who are in other unions disputing, so ambulance workers and even police cars occasionally giving us a honk. Lots of mail delivery people, because all of those unions have been on strike, on and off over the last couple of months. So there is this sense of solidarity, and that's really what's keeping us going in many ways. And the fact that, there's so many UCU people on strike and engaging in industrial action, and just the space for dialogue on the picket lines has really helped keep the motivation alive. And the support, I think, has, for the most part, been super positive from everyone.
That's good to hear.
I agree. I also say, I think some students, a lot of students are probably also just ignorant or were ignorant to the fact that we were striking the last few months. Because maybe if you have 1 or 2 classes canceled, then maybe that doesn't really linger that much. And I'm expecting them to be more aware this terms with the marking assessment boycott, because it will actually affect, the way they go forward in their term. Yeah.
I mean, maybe just to really briefly bring this up, because it's related. We're recording this on Friday, the 28th, and apparently earlier this week in the Netherlands, where they are also striking in regards to the firing of Susanne Teuber. Apparently there, the police was called to empty an academy building on protesters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which, I'm really hoping you will not have to deal with that, and also this best case doesn't happen again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's really terrible. We haven't had anything like that happen here, and hopefully.
Were they fired because they went on strike? Is that what happened, or?
So in this case, Susanne Teuber wrote an article. Well, she was fired. Well, I think first overgone for a promotion, and then she was fired, and she says this was because she wrote articles critical of her university and the firing practices, which were sexist, if not also racist. Yes, pretty ugly. Yes, but and I would not be surprised if universities do not really like it if they get called out.
That's shocking, but in some ways also not surprising. I mean, there has been, it's not in any way sort of similar in the sense of someone getting fired, but there's several universities in the UK, so far not Oxford University, but others, where the vice chancellors, who are sort of the main sort of person at the top of the university, have threatened to remove 100% of pay for people who are taking part on the marking and assessment boycott. So as Ilse explained earlier, the marking and assessment boycott, you're still working and doing all of your other duties as normal. You're just not marking or conducting exams and doing anything related to exams and assessment. So it is terrible that, there's this, you're still doing your work, but we're just going to cut all of your salary because you're not doing this one bit, which is it is really worrying and really shocking that this is happening. And hopefully, I mean, I've heard from some universities, I now can't remember the specific ones, where they've been able to convince the vice chancellors or really show that this is not on, and those threats have been revoked, but it's not the case for everywhere. We're in a sort of unique situation here in Oxford, I think, because a lot of the marking and assessment is paid in addition to our contracts in the most part, so it's kind of a separate payment. That doesn't mean that obviously if the vice chancellor wants to dock 100%, I'm sure they can still threaten us with it, but at least there's this kind of separation between the two things, which isn't necessarily great in the grand scheme of things, but in this case it may safeguard at least that happening in Oxford.
Would that be legal to just dock 100% of your pay? Like, would that...
I was about to ask the same thing.
Yeah. Like, can an employer just randomly... Well, obviously not randomly, but can an employer just say, well, if you don't do this particular thing, then I'm not going to pay you at all? That seems crazy.
Yeah, I'm not 100% familiar with the legal side of things, but my sort of very basic knowledge is that it really depends on the contracts people are on. So in some cases, there will be some clauses in the contract that if you're not doing all of the things that are in your contract, then there's some sort of, I don't know if it's a loophole or that the university has a right to kind of decide if they're going to remove pay or reduce pay by a certain amount. So, but yeah, I wouldn't, don't quote me on that. There's probably information online that explains that a bit better, but that's kind of my basic understanding on why universities are able to do it, even though it sounds completely ridiculous.
So, does the union cover cases like these that you get your pay from the union?
Yeah, so the union has a lot of money that comes in through contributions from members, and that's one thing that's really great, is that the contributions, by making monthly contributions, it means that we have a pot of money that we can apply to cover strike action. For example, a lot of us obviously lost pay by going on strike over the last few months, and you're able to apply, and the process has been actually fairly simple. I've applied to it recently, and I was able to recover most of the funds that I lost. And I think for these situations, yes, it is also possible, of course, dependent on how much money they have available overall. But they're also very much active in sort of helping with legal challenges or assisting particular cases at university levels to make sure that their workers are protected. So there's a lot of support within the union to help in all of those situations and really fight back all of those things, in addition to providing financial assistance as well.
I mean, not ideal, but that's at least it's good that you get covered in the end.
Good advertisement to join a union.
Definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I did sign up this morning, since I moved country recently. I didn't get around yet to sign up here in Denmark. But yeah.
No. Nice. Congrats.
I mean, I'm a student. I think I'm like a non-paying student member of UCU. I definitely get emails, but there's no point in Cambridge because PhD students who do any teaching don't actually get contracts, so can't strike. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I've just not been doing any teaching at all because I don't want to, because it just didn't seem worth the effort and the sort of the ridiculous pay rates and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's really it's a big issue, and this ties to all of the things that we're fighting for, and we can go into the uniqueness of Oxford and Cambridge in a little bit. But the fact that these opportunities are given to students and in many cases also early career researchers as sort of career development opportunities, but then the financial compensation for that is a very small amount to nothing, which obviously it's great to get these experiences and that's how it's branded that way, but I also think it's really unfair that these aren't properly compensated, because when other people doing the teaching would get compensated for it. So it's almost like free labor, almost it is free labor, let's call it that. And I think it does really start affecting people's decisions as to whether they're actually going to take this career opportunity or actually do a different opportunity where they might still not get paid for it, but might be more rewarding, or at least it's, something else, either helping a local community or helping local students. So I think there's a lot of things that now we're starting to think more about it and think carefully, and hopefully that will also make universities listen and say, hang on a minute, we have to rethink what our economic system is and how we treat the people who are doing teaching for us, to make sure that they feel adequately rewarded and valued, really.
Yeah, but the problem is though that lots of PhD students don't have, so my stipend covers my living costs, so I don't have to teach. But obviously that's not the case for not just lots, for probably most PhD students. And so it's not a case of being able to decide whether or not you want to take up this career opportunity, especially if you have restrictions on how many hours a week you're allowed to work. So
yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of like you're being held hostage. Like you have a stipend that doesn't cover your living costs, and then they're like, "Oh, we'll throw you some money your way if you do some teaching, which will also be great for your CV." And you're like, "Oh, that sounds amazing." But actually, if you calculate the amount of the pay you get per hour, it's really, really
yeah,
little.
we're only going to pay you for the contract hour, not for the the time that you need to prepare for that.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's insane.
And at least in the case of Cambridge, and then you're also an independent worker. You don't get a contract because you're just providing the service to the university as a completely free people.
Yeah.
That is so fucked up, honestly.
I'm just laughing because it's so ridiculous. I'm not laughing because
it is really ridiculous. Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean,
and I didn't realize. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just want to mention, like in Finland, first in Finland, now here in Denmark, I'm salaried. I get a fixed amount of money every month.
Yeah.
I am in a weird limbo between staff and student when it comes to like rules and regulations here. But I am a full-time employee, and I'm not being paid great, but I'm being paid as such I can live.
Yeah, no, it's I don't know. I didn't realize before I moved to the UK how crazy the system is, because also usually most stipends, at least in my department, are for 3 years, but most people take 4 to 5 years for their degrees. So when you get the stipend and you get, you're accepted to the PhD program, they're like, you'll take 3 years and we'll pay you for 3 years, or, somehow a funding body will pay you for 3 years. And you're like, okay, cool. And then actually you start looking around and you see that people are taking way longer, because that's actually how long it takes to do a PhD. And you're just supposed to figure out how to pay, the last year or two of your degree. And that's, I think, it causes a lot of people to have like part-time jobs by the time they finish their degree. And I don't think that should be the way that a PhD is conducted. Like, you should be able to do research full time and do it well without being stressed about your income. So the University and Colleges Union actually has a campaign. The postgraduate group has a campaign to get PhD students to become staff in the UK, but it's definitely a long ways away. But that's something we're also fighting for right now with the union.
Move on to a slightly different question. So far, I've been member of a union now again, but only ever, a person who pays the money every month to be represented. You guys are more than that. You are active in your local chapters. How did that come to be, and how could one start, and what are you doing? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, great question. I think probably the most honest answer is that it just sort of happened. I mean, initially I joined the union just after I finished my PhD, and I already had this sort of fellowship lined up, and I was sort of listening to the struggles of some of my postdoctoral colleagues, and also just hearing what was happening with the UCU. And I had made a decision for several different reasons of a bunch of different things that happened during my PhD. I'm sure all of you experiencing this journey yourselves right now. There's a lot of high stress and a lot of things that, you get to learn about the system that you work in, and what might or might not work for you. And I was determined that if I was to stay in academia, that whatever I was going to do, I was going to try and be active and change the system for better. And that wasn't necessarily initially, my idea wasn't necessarily to do it through the union. I was just, I didn't really know what was going to happen. It was just, I'll see how it goes. And if opportunity arises to kind of stand up for certain values that I believe in, then I will do that and not sort of accept how things are, which is kind of how it happened with the PhD. But also during the PhD, it's really hard to have the headspace for these sorts of things. And that was kind of where I was at the time. So and then as I joined the union and then started attending some of the meetings, And then the strike started happening, and I joined the picket line. At the time, I was still just a member and just joining in with things that were being organized. And it came, to the surface. So I learned that the current rep for my department was actually going to be away on sabbatical for 6 months to a year, and they were looking for someone to kind of step in and replace them temporarily. So I didn't at the time feel like I actually had the energy or the headspace to do it, but no one came up and sort of said, put themselves forward. So I figured, well, someone has to do it. So that's kind of how I ended up volunteering myself for that role, because I felt it was that important that, regardless of how much work I had on, that was something that I truly cared about, and I wanted to help make a difference and support my colleagues in whatever it was that they needed. And that's kind of how it happened. And then I've just been learning a lot about the UCU and how to organize. There were a few sort of training sessions available on sort of how to mobilize unions and how to get people to join and how to convince people why it's important to have this collective action. So that has all been really good, and it's been just great to have the energy of my colleagues as well. And that's kind of how it sort of snowballed into where I am today. It's still a learning process. I'm still figuring out best ways to engage with people and support people, including supporting students, of course, because we all, none of us want to be on strike. None of us want to have a marking and assessment boycott. But we feel that this is the only way that we're going to be able to deliver the teaching and the support that we think our students deserve, at the same time, while also having a working life balance that we need for ourselves and our own mental health. So that's kind of how it ended up, and maybe I'll continue. We'll see how it goes once my colleague returns. Maybe we'll do sort of a joint rep, so one representing the early career researchers and one representing more senior members of staff. But see how it goes.
Can't hurt to have more.
Yeah, exactly.
How about you, Ilse?
So also similarly, I guess, sort of happened. So I think with a lot of like activism and community work, like, it's a lot of volunteers working on something together. So it started off with, when the strikes were happening, and I'm a member, I was already a member of the union, and I was aware, but like more and more aware of like things happening and the union actually doing, organizing things, and you don't really see all the behind the scenes work normally. So I, at some point, got frustrated that the students weren't like getting involved so much or weren't informed by the union. So I was like, hey, are you guys doing anything about this? Can we like do this? And then basically they were like, that's a great idea. Yeah, go ahead and do that. Which I think I didn't realize, beforehand, that it's, again, like this volunteer run organization, and everybody who's in the union and active in the union is stressed and overworked all the time, and they really care, but they're working on top of their jobs to like make rallies happen and to make all these things happen. I sort of got dragged into it that way, being like, oh, I think this thing should happen. And, a group of people saying like, great idea, go ahead and do it. And then I was like, okay, I guess I'll be doing that now then. So then I got more involved with the postgraduate group and, creating documents to inform the students and running a campaign to like get different student organizations to pass motions of support and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's been really cool. But also just sort of like seeing a problem and then realizing you're going to have to be the one to solve it. Because people are just stretched very thin within the union. Yeah. That's been really great.
Thank you so much for coming on, talking about what is going on in the UK. I don't really want to end on this topic. So usually we, at least, starting with this season, we kind of wanted to close our episodes out with a chance of, just talking about some things we want to talk about, be it a rant. And I think in this case, since you guys didn't really have the opportunity, do you want to talk about why you're actually in academia? What is your research actually about?
And also, if you want to give it a reproducibility twist, tell us about how open science comes into your research and what the problems are that are specific to your research area, which I think both of you will have interesting answers to, as you, right? Like just from looking at what it is that you're working on.
You want to go first, Kat?
Sure, yeah. So as I said earlier, I research chimpanzee technology and culture, and I use archaeological methods to kind of study those sorts of behaviors. So a lot of it is observing the primates in the wild. So I do field work in different African countries. At the moment, I'm planning to do field work in Guinea, which is in West Africa, and then also in Tanzania, which is in Eastern Africa. So I work with wild chimpanzees, and I combine this technique of observing their behavior and then seeing how that behavior translates into some form of an archaeological record. And traditionally, a lot of this research has focused only on tool use, so stone tool use from chimpanzees or plant-based tool use more recently. And this is because it links very nicely to our understanding of our own human origins and the archaeology that we have for our early ancestors. And most of the remains that we have from those records, so if we talk about 3 million years to 2.5 million years and even to 300,000 years, which is when we have the first plant remains, most of the remains that we have are stones and bones. So really studying primates and the primate tool use has really been helpful to understand how the archaeology is formed and how the archaeology can actually tell us about the behavior itself. And my project at the moment is really taking a step beyond the technology. So chimpanzees are very cultural beings. They do a lot of things which vary between different communities. So the way they might forage for food, the way they might construct nests, also how they communicate or drum on trees, and all of these things are part of their cultural repertoires, and the huge diversity among the different communities across Africa. And what I want to see now is how those other behaviors and other tool using behaviors might leave archaeological traces, both as material remains, so artifacts like you would have in stones and tools themselves, but also potentially chemical traces that then end up in the soils. So there's kind of a combination of different approaches that I'm looking at, and it's really exploiting the full scope of the tools that we have in archaeology itself, so archaeology that we apply to human records and maybe in the more recent past to sort of the primate records or the chimpanzee records, to really get a greater understanding of what we might find in our distant past, because we haven't really used many of those techniques. So yeah, hopefully that's kind of where I'm going.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. But I think one of the things that I'm also it's not a side project, it's actually part of the main project itself, is actually using this knowledge and really expanding our knowledge on chimpanzee cultures and chimpanzee cultural heritage and documenting it. So we can, hopefully it will help with conservation action, both in terms of reaching the world and telling stories about these primate communities and the diverse cultures that they have, but hopefully also inform the strategies that we have in terms of conserving these populations and the decisions that are made, because a lot of these populations are at risk of extinction for several different reasons, and it's how can we understand their cultural behaviors and how this culture helps them adapt to their environment or survive in their environment, and how we can then use that on several different scales. So that's something that I'm also really excited about and hope my research can contribute as well. On the topic of reproducibility, which just to kind of close on that, I think that's a really interesting question and point, and I think because of the nature of the research, it's actually quite complicated to have reproducible methods in the sense that you might have with experimental research and other stuff, because the data can be, it is dependent on the field site that you're studying. You're studying wild animals, and that means that there are certain methods that you might have to adapt and tailor to different field sites. That said, I am comparing two field sites, so I'm hoping that the data and methods that I'm using are applicable to those field sites, but I also want to ensure that that will then be applicable and expandable to more field sites, so we have a bigger picture of sort of the mosaic, the cultural mosaic. But I think within my field, it's still we still haven't reached that learning curve. I think we're still trying to figure out how to integrate more reproducible methods into our research. And I think there's a lot of conversations that we still need to have about it. And hopefully we can learn a lot from the work that you're doing in your own fields. Because I think it is important. Of course, in some cases, it might be really difficult to ensure that we keep it that way. But yeah, for the future of research and ensuring that we can make sure this is applicable in all the contexts, then yeah, I think we definitely need to move forward. And hopefully with my research, I can work on that as well.
Oh, yeah, really cool. I find it fascinating, honestly, that, I mean, thinking about it, of course, that like different chimpanzee tribes, families have different cultural aspects. The kind of idea that chimpanzees have certain architectural disciplines sounds super interesting, or traditions, let's say, sounds super cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Ilse?
So my research. So broadly, like within my PhD, I look at how social norm violations affect how we like evaluate and behave towards in-group and out-group members. A couple of my studies that I'm working on are registered reports, which has been really cool, but also comes with like all that front-loading work that I it's super exciting, and I'm really happy to be, I have all my material already, I have all my analyses ready, etc. But it's also frustrating sometimes that I'm quite far into my PhD and I still don't have any data, because I need to, submit the registered reports. I need to be, reviewed, and then only then I can start collecting data. So that's been interesting. Last summer I conducted a pilot study for a replication that we're working on, and that's also been really interesting. So I'm replicating a study from the 1980s. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but what we did in this pilot is use both quantitative methods, so test material, on like how to what extent we're manipulating the right variables, which is desirability, but also because the context is a little bit different, we're looking at a different Italian city than the original study. How people in that different city look at the material, if that's in the same way that people did in the 1980s. And we added some qualitative elements. So we did a focus group to discuss how we could change the material to, test the same hypotheses, but also stick to as close of a replication as possible. So that's been quite cool. Replications, reproducibility, I don't know, I try to do everything as reproducible as possible, version control and all that.
What's the finding you're trying to replicate?
So thank you for asking, because I realized I was talking very abstractly. So we're looking at linguistic intergroup bias. So this is a study from 1989 by Maas et al. It's the effect that if you discuss positive behavior from your in-group, you are inclined to do so in more abstract terms than if it's the out-group, and the opposite if it's negative behavior. So if you see one of your in-group kicking a dog, that's one of the vignettes that they used, you would say, oh, he's kicking a dog, like you would describe it very concretely, whereas if it's an out-group member, you would say like, this person is evil. And if it's positive behavior, if it's an in-group member, you would say like, this person is amazing. And if it's an out-group member, you'd say like, oh, they're just helping an old lady cross the street, so that concrete abstract dimension. So that's,
I remember that back from social psychology. It's one of the
it's one of the foundational intergroup bias studies. So it's really cool, but it was conducted in Ferrara in Italy in the 1980s, in this very specific context where in an Italian city you have different neighborhoods that compete together in horse races, and because they have these horse races they compete in, they have very strong group identities in those neighborhoods. And so that's the context they conducted that study in. And we're going to do the replication in Siena, which is a different Italian city with a similar social structure. But we have to make sure, we had to make sure in this pilot that, the material fits, for instance, in Ferrara, they also have donkey races. In Siena, they don't. So some of the vignettes have had donkeys in it, and we have to change them to horses, things like that. We want to do a close replication, but also, honor the cities. So that's been the pilot that we've been running for a replication that is the register report that we'll be submitting soon. Yeah.
Sounds really cool.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. And I think it's really cool to be replicating a foundational effect like that. And also just digging into the exact analyses that they did and try to replicate them, but also update them with like more modern analyses. Because the 1980s had, some different standards for how to conduct statistics. So yeah.
Yeah, and even like on the reporting level, I would not be surprised if the paper is missing important details if you want to replicate it.
So I think that they I say for the time, of course I wasn't around. I think they did a really great job. Like I've seen papers that report way less than they are reporting. But yeah, you're right. There's still, we just had to, so I say we, by the way, I've got my co-authors, Adam Kenny and Laura Fortunato. So yeah, I had to simulate data based on means that didn't have standard deviations, stuff like that. Also, sometimes they report a t-test where it would make sense for them to do a paired t-test, but the degrees of freedom imply that they did what's it called? Not a paired samples t-test, but you can do a within subject t-test or a between subject t-test. And they did the degrees of freedom imply that they did a between subjects t-test instead of a within subject t-test, which would make sense for their design. So things like that, where I'm like, I'm not really sure you guys did exactly what you're supposed to. But they've definitely, tried to do it really well. I don't know, that's maybe a bit condescending. So I'm just trying to say they report a pilot study and they report things pretty well again, I think compared to other studies I've read from the time. But yeah, according to our modern standards, I would definitely say that, we can use some updates in our replication study. Yeah.
So that's what you're doing.
Very cool.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's what we're doing. Yeah. Yeah. Cause it's a very interesting effect and I think it deserves a replication. Yeah.
Cool.
Great. Anything to add? Otherwise, I'd slowly start with the outro.
Great.
I think we've got it back to positive land. If that was the plan.
Things that make people excited.
Right.
Science is exciting. Yeah, it is really.
Yes.
It is really exciting.
And people should be paid.
It just would be great if we could actually get paid well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good closing statement.
Great.
So, Ilse, Kat, if our listeners want to, where could they find you? Is there anything you want them to look up? I don't know. The UCU takes donation, I guess. I assume.
Yeah, so the UCU does take donations. I think you can just find there if you Google UCU.uk, I think, or .com, it should show up.
We'll put a link in the description.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
That would be great. I think local branches also take donations. So there's sort of two different pots. There's the national pot and there's the local branch that also tops up basically with contributions as well. Those two accept donations. In terms of if you're interested in my research and you want to follow me or learn more, I'm on Twitter. I'm sure Jan will put that in the chat as well, or in the link for the podcast. But so it's just at Katarina Warren. And I also have a website which I'll pass on to Jan. So if anybody wants to follow up on that, and also if anybody wants to get in touch with questions about the UCU or my own research, you're very welcome to.
Cool.
Same here. You can Google me or find me on Twitter, or Google me and then email me if you find my email address somewhere. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything.
Awesome. How about you, Sophia?
Oh, okay. I guess I want
to... Do you want to be found on Twitter?
Honestly, not on Twitter, but also I'm not using Mastodon enough. So, I guess it's back to email for me. But yeah, I think I'm pretty findable online. I'm very happy to talk to people.
Messenger pigeon, perhaps.
But I thought this was a question for our guests. Jan, where can people find you?
It's a question for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, I am at vornhagenjb@hci.social on Mastodon. And I'm also still on Twitter, but not actively. trying to avoid.
Yeah, I'm
Please.
still to make that transition.
I was gonna say I'm also on Mastodon, but I just use neither. So
Exactly. That's exactly the transition that I've made as well. I'm on Mastodon as well.
Yeah.
And I'm just I just lurk on both. Very little.
It is absolutely the healthiest choice.
probably.
There is
Thanks, Elon.
so much annoying stuff. Yeah. And with that, thank you very much for listening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming on, Ilse and Kat. It was great.
Thanks for having us.
Sophia, great talking to you. And hopefully see you all around. All the best for the fight.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for having us.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.